The silence in this old house has a sound all its own. It is not a lonely sound, mind you. Not most days. It is the sound of a life lived, settled into the very bones of the walls. It is the gentle hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, a sound that has been the background music to my life for 30 years. It is the groan of the floorboards upstairs when the afternoon sun hits them just right, a sound that used to mean my boy, Michael, was finally waking up on a Saturday. My name is Martha, and I have lived in this house for 45 years. I raised my son here, buried my husband from here, and I always believed I would celebrate my son's wedding from here. That was the dream, you see. A mother's dream. It is a heavy thing, a dream like that. You carry it for so long it becomes a part of you, like an extra limb you never knew you were missing until you had a reason to use it. I was sitting in my worn, blue armchair, the one James, my late husband, always called the Queen's throne. The sun was streaming through the lace curtains, catching the little dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, silent ballerinas. In my lap was my old photo album. The binding is soft and worn, the pages yellowed with time and touch. I had it open to the picture of my own wedding day. James was so handsome, standing tall and proud in a suit. And I was a slip of a thing, smiling so wide I thought my face might crack clean in two. We were married at the First Baptist Church downtown, with nearly 200 people packed into the pews. My mother and my aunts cooked for 3 whole days. There were platters of fried chicken, collard greens seasoned with smoked turkey, macaroni and cheese so cheesy it was a sin, and a sweet potato pie that people talked about for years. It was more than a party. It was a beginning, a testament. It was our 2 families and our whole community standing up and saying, "We witness this. We support this. We are here for this union." That is what I wanted for Michael. My only child. He is a good boy, a good man now. He has his father's steady hands and my thoughtful eyes. When he brought Sarah over for the first time 2 years ago, I held my breath. She was a quiet thing. Polite, of course. She had a lovely smile, but it seemed shy, like it was afraid to take up too much space. She was not from our world, our community of big Sunday dinners, and even bigger personalities. She grew up in a different city, with a smaller family. Quieter. But she made my son happy. The way he looked at her, it was the same way his father used to look at me when he thought I was not watching. A look that said, "You are my peace." So I loved her. I chose to love her because my son did. When they told me they were engaged 6 months ago, my heart just about burst with joy. Michael called me, his voice thick with excitement. "She said yes, Mama. She said yes." And right then, in that moment, the dream began to take shape. It was no longer a fuzzy, faraway hope. It was real. It was happening. I immediately went to the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. I pulled out the box with my wedding veil. It was carefully wrapped in tissue paper, a little yellowed, but still beautiful. I imagined Sarah wearing it. I started making lists in my head. The guest list would be long, of course. All our family from 2 states over. Our entire church congregation. The neighbors I had known for 40 years. I thought about the food, pulling out my mother's old, grease-stained recipe cards. I thought about the music. We would need a gospel choir that could shake the heavens and a DJ for the reception who knew how to play the old songs, the ones that make you want to grab your partner and forget your troubles. But every time I would bring it up with Michael and Sarah, they were vague. "We're just enjoying being engaged right now, Mama," Michael would say gently. "Weddings are so much work, Martha," Sarah would add, her voice soft on the phone. "And so expensive." I understood that, of course. The world is different now. More expensive. More complicated. "Do not you worry about the money, child," I would tell them. "Your father and I, we put money aside for this day. This is what it is for. For family. For celebration." I tried not to push. I truly did. But the ladies at church, they were asking every single Sunday, "Martha, Have they set a date yet? Sister Beatrice would ask, fanning herself in the pew in front of me. We are all just so excited for that boy of yours, Reverend Johnson's wife would say, squeezing my hand. It felt like I was holding a secret I did not even know. The pressure was building, a gentle but constant weight. This past week, it felt heavier than usual. I just had this feeling, a nagging in my spirit, that time was slipping by. I wanted to send out announcements. I wanted to book the church hall. I wanted to feel the joy of planning, not the strange, quiet waiting. So, on that sun-drenched afternoon, sitting in my throne with my memories in my lap, I made a decision. I was going to get an answer. I was not going to be pushy. I was just going to be a mother, seeking a little clarity. I closed the photo album, the soft puff of air smelling of old paper and glue. I stood up, my knees cracking a little protest, and walked into the kitchen. I picked up the phone, my hand steady. My heart was full of love, full of plans, full of the weight of a beautiful, heavy dream I had carried for so long. I dialed my son's number, ready to help him and his sweet fiancée build the first day of the rest of their lives. The phone rang once, twice. Then her voice, soft and a little hesitant, came on the line. Hello, Martha? Hello, Sarah, honey, I said, my voice warm and full of the afternoon sun. How are you, child? Is Michael there? There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, a small little pocket of silence before Sarah spoke again. He is not here right now, Martha. He just stepped out to the store to grab a few things. Her voice was as soft as ever, but there was a little tremor in it, something I could not quite put my finger on. Oh, that is all right, honey, I said, my own voice full of a determined cheerfulness. No need to bother him. I can talk to you. You are the bride-to-be, after all, the queen of the hour. I chuckled, hoping to bring a smile to her voice. All I got back was another small silence and then a quiet yes. It felt like I was talking into a deep well, my words just dropping and disappearing. But I was on a mission, a mother's mission. So I pushed on, painting the picture in my heart for her. I was just sitting here, I continued, settling back into my armchair. I was looking at my old wedding album, and it just got me to thinking about you too, and about the big day. I know the world moves so fast now, and you young people have your own way of doing things. I truly do understand that. But some things are timeless, you know? A wedding is more than just a piece of paper from the courthouse. It is a promise you make not just to each other, but in front of God and everyone who loves you. It is a celebration for the whole family, the whole community. It is a rope that ties everyone together, a blessing you share with the people who have prayed for you your whole life. I paused, thinking of all those loving faces at the church. Do you know Sister Beatrice is already planning to crochet a special blanket for your first child? She asked me what your favorite colors were just last week. And Mr. Henderson from down the street, he came by yesterday. He said he would be honored to use that old classic car of his, the big shiny blue one, to drive you to the church. The whole neighborhood is waiting to celebrate you. The silence on the other end of the line was so complete now, it felt like a presence in the room with me. I could hear the hum of my refrigerator, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Sounds I had not even noticed just moments before were now loud and sharp. Sarah, are you still there, child? I asked, a little thread of worry starting to weave its way through my happy plans. I am here, Martha, she finally said. Her voice was barely a whisper. My motherly instincts took over. All thoughts of wedding cakes and choirs flew right out of my head. Is everything all right, honey? You sound distant. Did I say something wrong? Am I pushing too hard? No, she said quickly. A little too quickly. No, it is not you. It is just, Martha, it is all so much. I could hear the strain in her voice then. It was real, and my heart went out to her. This sweet, quiet girl my son loved so much. "Oh, baby, I know it is," I said, my voice softening. "I know it feels like a mountain, but that is what I am here for. That is what family is for. To help you climb. We will do it all together, one step at a time. I will do all the heavy lifting, I promise. All you two have to do is show up and be in love." I smiled, feeling like I had finally gotten to the heart of the matter. She was just overwhelmed. That was all. "So," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "let us make it easy. Let's just start with the very first step. I will not bring it up again until you are ready, but I just need one little thing to tell all these folks who keep asking me." I took a breath, the warm, sunlit air of my quiet living room filling my lungs. "So, I guess what I am really calling to ask is, when is the wedding? You do not have to give me a specific day. Just give me a season, honey. A month. Anything. Just a little something we can all look forward to." And then came the silence. This silence was different. It was not a quiet pause. It was not a hesitant quiet. This was a loud silence. A heavy silence. It pressed down on the phone line, traveled into my ear, and filled the whole room. I waited and waited. I could hear her take a shaky breath, like a person about to jump into deep, cold water. "Martha," she began, and her voice broke. She cleared her throat and started again. "Martha," she said, and this time her voice was flat, empty of all the softness I was used to. "We got married yesterday." The words did not make sense. They were English words, I knew them, but they were jumbled up in the wrong order. They could not possibly mean what they said. My mind tried to rearrange them. "We are getting married. We will be married." But that is not what she said. What did you say, child?" I asked, my voice suddenly feeling thick and clumsy in my own mouth. "The line is a little fuzzy. I think I misheard you." I was giving her a chance to take it back, to say the words I wanted to hear. But she did not take it. "We got married," she repeated, and this time her voice was clearer, stronger, as if a great weight had been lifted from her by finally saying it out loud. "We got married yesterday, at the courthouse. Just the two of us." The sun was still shining through my lace curtains. The dust motes were still dancing their silent ballet in the air. The old grandfather clock in the hall was still ticking. Everything in my world was exactly the same as it had been 5 minutes ago. But everything was different. The phone in my hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The weight of my dream, the one I had carried for so long, had come crashing down all at once. And the silence in my old house had a new sound now. It was the sound of a heart breaking. The world did not stop. That is the first thing I remember thinking. The grandfather clock in the hall did not pause its steady, rhythmic ticking. The sun did not dim. My heart, however, it seemed to forget its own rhythm. It gave a hard, painful thud in my chest, and then it was like all the blood in my body turned to ice water. "Courthouse," I whispered into the phone. The word felt foreign on my tongue, like a piece of grit. "Just the two of you?" "Yes, Martha," Sarah said. I could hear something in her voice then, a desperate attempt at explanation. It was what we wanted. Something small and quiet. Just for us. Just for us. The words echoed in the sudden, vast emptiness of my living room. For 45 years, this house had been the center of our family. For 30 years, every decision I made was for us. Me and James. Me and Michael. Our family. Our community. Now there was a new us. And I was not a part of it. Why? The question came out like a gasp, a desperate need for air. Why would you do that, Sarah? Why would you keep a thing like this a secret from your own mother? I said, your own mother, because in that moment, she was supposed to be my daughter. That is what marriage meant. She was mine now, and Michael was hers, and we were all one family. But her secret had built a wall between us before we ever had a chance to lay a foundation. We did not mean for it to be a secret, she said, and her voice was thin and reedy. We were going to tell you. Michael and we were planning to come over for dinner tonight to tell you in person. Tonight. They got married yesterday. They were husband and wife for a whole day and a night, and they were going to come to my house for dinner and tell me over my own pot roast and collard greens. They were going to sit at my table, the table where I taught my son how to hold a fork, and pass the news to me like it was a dish of potatoes. The hurt was so sharp, so physical, it felt like a knife had slid between my ribs. So you were lying to me, I said, my voice flat and cold. This whole time. For months. Every time I asked about the wedding, every time I talked about my plans, you knew. You knew you were never going to have a wedding. It was not a lie, she insisted, and now there were tears in her voice. We just did not know how to tell you. We knew how much it meant to you, Martha. We knew you had this big dream. We did not want to disappoint you. And there it was. My dream. She said it like it was a sickness I had. An unreasonable, foolish thing that they had to manage, that they had to tiptoe around. Not a gift I was trying to give them. Not a blessing I was trying to share. But a burden. So you decided it was better to deceive me instead, I said. The ice in my veins was turning to fire now, a slow, burning anger that started in my belly and spread through my whole body. Where is my son, Sarah? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Put my son on the phone. He is not here, I told you, she sobbed. He went to the store. When he gets back, I said, each word precise and separate. You tell him that his mother called. You tell him I know. And you tell him that he has broken my heart. I did not wait for her to reply. I did not want to hear any more excuses, any more apologies that sounded like accusations. I put the telephone receiver back into its cradle. The click was loud and final in the quiet room. I stood there for a long moment, my hands still resting on the phone. The house felt different. It was the same floral wallpaper, the same worn Persian rug, the same faint scent of lemon polish and old books, but it felt like a stranger's house. Before, the silence was full of memories and hopes. Now, it was just empty. I walked back to my armchair, the Queen's throne, and I sank into it. My body felt heavy, like every one of my 68 years was pressing down on me all at once. My gaze fell on the photo album still lying on the end table. My wedding day. The smiling faces of my parents, my aunts, my uncles, all long gone now. They were all there. They all bore witness. Their presence on that day was a promise to hold us up if we stumbled, to guide us, to be the roots of the new family tree we were planting. My son had chosen to plant his tree on a barren patch of land, with no one to see it but himself. I thought of the cedar chest upstairs, at the foot of my bed. I thought of my wedding veil, wrapped so carefully in the yellowed tissue paper. I had saved it for a daughter I never had, and then for the woman my son would choose. I had imagined the moment I would give it to her. The tears in our eyes. The connection between generations. A mother passing on a piece of her own happiness. The thought of it now was a physical pain. That dream and all the little dreams that went with it had not just died. They had been murdered. And I had not even known they were in danger. I closed my eyes. The afternoon sun was warm against my eyelids, but I felt cold to the bone. For the first time since my James passed away, I felt truly, completely alone. The silence was no longer a comfort. It was a judgment. It was the sound of a door being shut in my face. The sound of being left behind. And in that profound, echoing quiet, I finally allowed the first tear to fall. It slid down my cheek, hot against my cold skin, and splashed onto my folded hands. One tear, for a lifetime of dreams, turned to dust in a single phone call. The sun had long since abandoned my living room, leaving behind long, creeping shadows that clung to the furniture like a shroud. I had not moved from my chair. My body was a statue of grief, cold and heavy. The house grew cooler around me, and I did not bother to get up and turn on the heat. The chill I felt was not something a furnace could fix. It was a cold that had settled deep in my marrow, a cold born of shock and a profound, hollow loneliness. I replayed the conversation with Sarah in my head, over and over. Her whispered confession. "We got married yesterday." The words still felt like a language I did not speak. How does a mother not know her own son is getting married? It was a question that had no answer, and it beat against the inside of my skull like a trapped moth. I had raised that boy. I had kissed his scraped knees. I had held him through fevers. I had taught him how to tie his shoes and how to be a good man. I remembered when he was 10. He broke Mrs. Gable's window playing baseball in the street. He was so terrified of her husband, a big, stern-looking man, that he ran and hid in his closet and would not come out. James wanted to march him right over there to confess, but I stopped him. I went to the closet and sat on the floor in the dark with him. I did not yell. I just sat. After a long while, he started crying and told me everything. He said he was not just scared, he was ashamed. I told him, "Michael, a good man is not a man who never makes mistakes. A good man is a man who owns his mistakes and does his best to make them right." I walked with him to Mrs. Gable's door. I stood right behind him while he confessed, his little voice trembling. And I was never more proud. Where was that boy? The boy I taught to face his shame with honesty? He had been replaced by a man who hid from his own mother, who chose secrets over truth. The shrill, piercing ring of the telephone was a violation against the heavy silence. It jolted me, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew it was him. Sarah would have told him. The phone rang again. And again. Each ring was an accusation, a demand. On the fourth ring, my hand moved, a slow and reluctant servant to my will. I lifted the heavy plastic receiver to my ear. I said nothing. I just breathed, my own breath sounding loud and shaky in the stillness. "Mama?" His voice. The sound of it, so familiar, yet so foreign in this new, broken world, sent a fresh wave of pain through me. "Mama, I know you're there. Please say something." I could not. The words were stones in my throat. My silence was the only weapon I had left. It was a shield. It was a punishment. Sarah told me what happened. He rushed on, his words tumbling over each other in his guilt. "Mama, listen. I am so sorry. We were going to tell you tonight. I promise. I did not know how. I was wrong. I was so wrong, Mama." The word wrong finally broke through my paralysis. It was too small a word for this vast betrayal. Wrong. I finally spoke, and my voice was a stranger's, a low, rasping sound that was brittle with unshed tears. "You think wrong is the word for this, Michael? A child is wrong when he tracks mud on the clean floor. A man who lies to his mother for months, who sneaks off to get married like it is a shameful secret, who lets her sit here planning a party he knows will never happen. That is not wrong. Michael, that is cruel." "It was not meant to be cruel," he pleaded, and I could hear the desperation in his voice. "I was trying to protect you." The excuse was so absurd, so insulting. It lit a fire in my icy veins. "Protect me?" I asked, and now my voice rose, shaking with a righteous anger. "Protect me from what?" "From joy. From celebrating my only son? From seeing you take a wife?" "You were not protecting me, Michael. You were protecting yourself. You took the coward's way out because you could not face your own mother and tell her the truth." "It was not just me," he said, his voice dropping. "Sarah, she gets overwhelmed. A big wedding, with everyone watching, it is not her. It is not us. We wanted something that was just about our love, without all the production." And there it was, the choice. He had chosen her comfort over my heart. He had chosen her fears over my dreams. My son, the one I had taught to be an honest man, was now making excuses for a lie, and he was using his new wife as the reason. The fire in me died out as quickly as it had flared, leaving behind nothing but cold, gray ash. "I see," I said, and the two words were heavy with all the things I could not say. "I see that I am no longer your first thought. I see that this new family you have made has no room for the traditions of the old one. I see that I have lost my son." "Mama, please do not be like this," he whispered, and I could hear that he was crying now. The sound that used to break my heart now barely touched me. "Like what, Michael?" I asked, my voice as empty as the house around me. "Like a mother who has had her heart broken? Like a woman who has been made a fool of in her own community? How would you like me to be? Should I be happy for you?" "Yes," he choked out. I want you to be happy for me." "Then you should have given me a reason to be," I said softly. "You and your wife have made your choice. You have had your wedding. So, congratulations." The last word was a shard of glass. I did not slam the phone down. I did not give him the satisfaction of a fight. I gently, deliberately, placed the receiver back into its cradle, cutting off his pained cry. The click was soft, but it echoed in the darkness like the sound of a lock turning, of a final door being closed. I sat there in my throne, in a silence that was no longer just empty. It was complete. EOF. Sleep had not been a refuge. It had been a shallow, restless state, filled with tangled dreams of empty churches and silent phone calls. I woke up with the first gray light of dawn, but I did not feel rested. I felt ancient, like I had lived 100 years in one night. The house was cold, colder than it should have been for an early autumn morning. It was a coldness that came from the inside, a chill that had settled deep into my bones. I got out of bed and went through the motions of my morning. I washed my face, the woman in the mirror looking back at me with tired, swollen eyes that I barely recognized. I put on my housecoat, its familiar softness offering no comfort today. Downstairs, the silence was even more profound than it had been the night before. The grandfather clock ticked on, a relentless marking of time I no longer wanted to acknowledge. I made coffee. The familiar ritual, the grinding of the beans, the gurgle of the machine, it was a hollow echo of a life I was living just yesterday morning. A life full of happy anticipation. The coffee tasted bitter, like my own heart. I sat at my kitchen table, the one where Michael had done his homework for 12 years, and I stared out the window into my backyard. The birds were singing. A squirrel was scampering up the old oak tree. The world was carrying on as if nothing had happened, as if my own world had not been turned completely upside down. Mrs. Gable from next door came out to get her newspaper, and she waved at me through the window. A big, cheerful wave. I could not bring myself to wave back. I just nodded and turned away. How could I face her? How could I face any of them? They would all ask me the same question, their faces full of innocent excitement. "So, Martha, when is the big day?" What was I supposed to say? "Oh, you missed it. It was yesterday." I missed it too. The shame of it was a hot, prickly feeling on my skin. It was not my shame, but I was the one who had to wear it. I avoided looking at the telephone on the wall. It sat there silently, a black plastic serpent that had delivered a fatal bite of poison into my life. I knew Michael would call again. He would keep calling. But I did not know what to say to him. What was there to say? The sound of the doorbell was like a gunshot in the quiet house. It rang once, a sharp, clear chime that vibrated through the floorboards and right up my spine. My heart leaped into my throat, a frantic, trapped bird. One part of me, the foolish mother part that never quite dies, prayed it was my son. Alone, ready to fall into my arms and tell me it was all a terrible mistake. The other part, the wounded part that was now in charge, knew better. It would be them. I walked from the kitchen, down the short hall to the front door. Each step was heavy, as if my feet were encased in lead. I smoothed down my housecoat. I took a deep, shaky breath. I did not want them to see how completely they had undone me. I opened the door, and there they were, the new Mr. and Mrs. Hall. They looked like two children who had been caught in a terrible, unforgivable lie. Michael's face was pale and puffy, his father's eyes bloodshot and full of a pleading I could not bear to look at. He was holding a small bunch of carnations from the grocery store, wrapped in crackling cellophane. The colors were too bright, an aggressive, artificial cheerfulness that felt like an insult. A $5 apology for $1 million hurt. And Sarah. She stood just behind him, not quite at his side. A ghost at the feast I was never invited to. Her beautiful face was pale and blotchy, and she could not meet my eyes. She stared at the welcome mat on my porch, as if reading the fine print on a contract she had not understood. For a long moment, nobody spoke. We just stood there, the three of us, in a triangle of pain on my front porch. The morning air was crisp and clean around us, but the air between us was thick and suffocating. Then Michael took a small step forward, holding out the flowers. "Mama," he said, and his voice was thick with unshed tears. The word hung in the air between us. It was a bridge he had burned to the ground yesterday. And now he was trying to rebuild it with a single word and a handful of cheap flowers. I looked at his face, the face I had loved more than my own life for 30 years. I looked at the girl hiding behind him, the girl who had my son's heart and his loyalty. And I looked at the flowers, a pathetic symbol of a love they claimed to have for me, a love that had not been strong enough to include me, to trust me, to honor me. My hand rested on the edge of the door. It would be so easy to close it, to shut them out just as they had shut me out, to let them feel, just for a moment, the cold, lonely emptiness of being on the wrong side of a closed door. My whole life, my door had been open, to family, to friends, to neighbors, to anyone in need. But this was a different kind of need. This was a need for a forgiveness I did not have to give. My hand, the one resting on the cool wood of the door, felt like it belonged to someone else. It was a hand that had spent a lifetime opening, not closing. A hand that had bandaged my son's scraped knees, waved goodbye at the school bus, and held my husband's hand until his very last breath. Closing this door would be a betrayal of everything that hand had ever done. It would be a betrayal of the woman I had always tried to be. So I did not close it. With a slowness that felt deliberate and heavy, I pulled the door inward, opening it wider. I stepped back into the hallway, leaving the space for them to enter. But I said nothing. My silence was not an invitation. It was a challenge. Michael seemed to understand. He hesitated for a moment, then took a step across the threshold into the house he had grown up in. He was a visitor now. Sarah followed, her steps so light she was barely making a sound, as if she was afraid the floorboards themselves would reject her. I turned and walked toward the living room, not looking back to see if they were following. I knew they were. I could feel their guilt trailing behind me like a shadow. I went to my chair, the Queen's throne, and I sat down. It was the only place in the world where I still felt a shred of authority, a sliver of control. I folded my hands in my lap, and I waited. They stood in the middle of my Persian rug, two lost souls in a land that should have been home. Michael looked at the cellophane-wrapped carnations in his hand as if he did not know what they were or how he had come to be holding them. He glanced around, looking for a place to put them down, but there was no welcoming vase, no empty space offered. Finally, he walked over to the end table and laid them down carefully, next to the photo album of my own wedding. The cheap, bright flowers next to the rich, leather-bound history looked garish and wrong. A desecration. He turned back to me, his hands now empty and fidgeting at his sides. "Mama," he began again, his voice cracking. "Please, talk to us." "I am not the one with something to say, Michael," I replied, and my voice was calm and even. It was a terrifying sort of calm, the calm of a deep, cold lake. "You are the one who came to my door. You talk." He took a deep breath, like a man about to dive into that cold water. "We messed up," he said. "I messed up. I know that. I was a coward. I was so worried about disappointing you, about not giving you the wedding you always dreamed of, that I chose the worst way possible to handle it. I thought if it was already done, it would be easier. That you would see how happy we are, and you would understand. Understand what? Asked, my voice still dangerously quiet. That my happiness is not important? That my feelings are a problem to be managed? That 30 years of being your mother earns me nothing but deceit? No, he said, taking a step closer. That is not what I meant. Your happiness is everything to me. That is why I was so scared. Suddenly, a small voice cut through the air. It was my fault. We both turned to look at Sarah. She was still standing in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold. But she had lifted her head, and for the first time, she was looking directly at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but they were clear. It was my idea, she said, her voice trembling but steady. The courthouse. Keeping it quiet. It was me. Michael started to interrupt, to defend her. Sarah, no, it was both of us. But she held up a hand, stopping him. Let me speak, Michael. She took another step toward me. She was not asking for pity. She was stating a fact. My family, Martha, it is not like yours, she said. My parents got divorced when I was 6. My mother remarried a man who had 2 kids of his own. My father moved to another state. Holidays were always complicated. They were about splitting time, about managing feelings, about making sure no one felt left out, which meant everyone always felt a little bit left out. She paused, swallowing hard. Big family things, they scare me, she whispered. They always feel like a performance, like a test I am going to fail. When you talked about the wedding, the big church, all those people, all the traditions, I could not breathe. All I could picture was my mother and my stepmother sitting on opposite sides of the aisle, glaring at each other. My father flying in for the weekend and feeling like a stranger. I love your son, she said, and her eyes filled with fresh tears, but she did not let them fall. I love him more than I have ever loved anyone. And the thought of our wedding day being about anything other than that love, it was unbearable to me. I wanted to marry him. I did not want to put on a show for 100 people who all had their own expectations. She finally broke my gaze and looked down at her hands. So, I asked him if we could just do it for us. Quietly. And then we could have a party later, a celebration. I did not understand. I did not understand what the ceremony itself meant to you. I thought it was just the party you cared about. I was wrong. And I hurt you. And I took your son away from you on a day when you should have been right there. And I am so sorry. Her words were honest. I knew that. I could feel the truth in them, the real, deep-seated fear that had driven her. And in another life, on another day, maybe my heart would have softened. Maybe I would have seen the scared little girl from a broken home and wanted to pull her into the safety of my own. But my heart was not soft today. It was a jagged, broken stone in my chest. I looked from her tear-streaked face to my son's anguished one. I hear you, I said, and the words fell like ice chips into the silence of the room. I hear your reasons. I hear your excuses. I hear your apology. I stood up from my chair, and they both flinched, as if expecting me to yell, to rage at them. But I did not. I walked over to the window and looked out at the world that was still, maddeningly, turning. You talk about love, I said, my back to them. But love is not just a feeling. It is an action. It is a choice. And you chose to act without honor. You chose to act without respect. You chose to act without me. I turned back to face them. They were still standing in the middle of my room, in the space between the door and my throne, a space that suddenly felt 1,000 miles wide. You are married now, I said, my voice flat, devoid of all emotion. I cannot change that. But you have broken something here. Something more than just my dream of a wedding. You have broken my trust. So I will say this once. I accept your apology. but I do not grant you my forgiveness. That is something you will have to earn." I left them standing there, in the silence and the wreckage. I walked out of the living room, up the stairs, and into my bedroom, closing the door softly behind me. I did not slam it. A slammed door is an invitation to an argument, a demand to be followed. A soft click is a statement. It is an ending. Once the bedroom door was closed, it was as if I had sealed myself in a tomb. The air was still and close. I stood with my back against the wood, my hand still on the brass knob, and I listened. My hearing, which had felt dull and distant all morning, was suddenly sharp. I could hear every secret sound of the house. The hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. And beneath those sounds, I listened for the ones that mattered. The shuffle of feet on the rug, a whispered conversation, anything. But there was only silence from downstairs. A heavy, waiting silence. I did not know how long I stood there. 1 minute, 5, maybe 10. Then I heard it, the soft, unmistakable click of the front door latching shut. It was not a slam. It was a quiet, respectful closing, an acknowledgement of my decree, an acceptance of their exile. The sound was more final than any shout could have been. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding, and my body sagged against the door. They were gone. The immediate feeling was not relief. It was a profound and aching emptiness. The house, which had been full of their guilt and my pain, was now just empty. I had drawn a line in the sand. I had stood my ground, but I was all alone on my side of it. The next few days were a study in silence. The phone rang, of course, twice that afternoon, 3 times the next day. I never answered. The answering machine would pick up, and my son's voice, strained and pleading, would fill the house for a few seconds before being cut off by the beep. I never listened to the full messages. I could not bear it. I moved through my home like a ghost. I made my meals but did not taste them. I dusted the furniture, my hands moving over the familiar surfaces of a life that no longer felt like my own. The cheap carnations Michael had brought sat on the end table, a garish splash of color in the muted room. They mocked me. Every time my eyes landed on them, I felt that fresh, sharp sting of a $5 apology for a priceless hurt. On the second day, I could not stand it anymore. I walked over, picked up the whole bunch, still wrapped in their crinkling cellophane, and I did not even put them in the kitchen trash. I walked them straight out the back door to the bin in the alley. I dropped them in among the coffee grounds and eggshells, and I put the heavy lid back on. Buried. Done. The act gave me a small, cold satisfaction that faded almost immediately, leaving the same ache behind. I thought of Sarah's confession, her story about her broken family. A part of me, the mother in me, understood her fear. I could see the scared girl she had been, shuffled between parents, never feeling a true sense of belonging. But another, stronger part of me, the part that was now a fortress of hurt, saw it differently. She had seen the strength of my family, the deep roots of our traditions, and instead of wanting to be grafted into that strong tree, she had chosen to chop at its trunk. She did not want to join my family. She wanted to create a new one with Michael on a separate plot of land, with a high fence around it. And my son, my foolish, lovesick son, had handed her the axe. Then Sunday came. Sunday was not like other days. Sunday had an obligation, an appointment with God and with my community. The thought of going to church was a physical misery. The thought of not going was impossible. If I did not show up at First Baptist, my phone would not stop ringing. Deacon Miller would be at my door. Mrs. Gable would launch a one-woman investigation. My absence would create a bigger story than my presence ever could. So I had to go. I had to face them. I got ready with the care of a soldier preparing for battle. I chose my navy blue dress, the one with the strong shoulders. I put on my best hat, the one with the small, dignified veil that would offer a tiny bit of shadow to hide behind. I put on my gloves. I looked at the woman in the mirror. She looked like Martha Hall. She looked strong. She looked respectable. But her eyes were those of a refugee, a displaced person in her own life. I walked downstairs, my heels clicking on the hardwood floors. The house was silent, my only companion. As I opened the front door, the bright morning sun made me flinch. It felt too cheerful, too optimistic for the day ahead. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me, locking it. The short walk to my car, parked at the curb, felt a mile long. I felt 100 pairs of unseen eyes on me from the windows of my neighbors' houses. I reached the car and put my hand on the cool metal of the door handle. I paused, my heart thumping a nervous, unsteady rhythm against my ribs. Inside that church were all the people I had planned to invite to my son's wedding. All the people who had watched him grow up. All the people who would ask me, with smiling, innocent faces, "When is the big day, Martha?" I did not have an answer for them. Not one that was the truth. And not one that was a lie I was willing to tell. I took one last, deep breath of the clean autumn air, and I opened the car door. The drive to First Baptist was 5 minutes, but on that Sunday morning, it felt like a journey across a barren desert. Every landmark, the corner store, the old oak tree, the park where Michael played as a boy, was a fresh wound. A reminder of a life that had felt whole just a few days ago. When I pulled into the church parking lot, I saw the usual gathering of familiar cars. I took a spot near the back, under the shade of a maple tree, prolonging the inevitable for a few more seconds. My hands, covered in their white cotton gloves, were trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. I was not worried about facing God. I was worried about facing Mrs. Gable. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I got out of the car. The performance of being Martha Hall had begun. I smoothed my dress, adjusted my hat, and began the long walk up the sidewalk to the heavy oak doors of the sanctuary. Heads turned as I approached. Smiles were offered. I returned them with a polite, practiced smile of my own, a mask I had perfected over 67 years. "Good morning, Martha. Lovely to see you, Sister Hall." I nodded, my lips forming the familiar greetings while my mind was screaming. I made it through the doors and into the narthex, and that is where the first test came. "Martha, dear, there you are." It was Beatrice Gable, her eyes bright with a relentless curiosity she disguised as friendly concern. "Beatrice," I said, my voice smoother than I felt. "Good morning to you." "You are looking a little tired, dear," she said, her head tilted. "Everything all right?" "Just fine." I lied, the word feeling like sand in my mouth. "A little busy, that is all." Her eyes lit up. "Oh, I am sure. Planning a wedding is a full-time job, is it not? Have you two set a date yet? The whole neighborhood is just dying to know." This was it, the question I had dreaded. The air seemed to thin around me. For a heartbeat, I thought I might faint. But the years of being a respectable woman, a deacon's wife, a mother, took over. My pride became a steel rod down my spine. I produced a small, dismissive laugh, a sound I did not recognize. "Oh, Beatrice, you know how these young people are," I said, my voice light and airy. "They have their own timeline for everything. We will all know when we know. Now, if you will excuse me, I want to find my seat before the music starts." I did not wait for her reply. I moved past her, my head held high, and walked into the sanctuary. I slid into my usual pew, the third one from the front on the right, the one James and I had shared for 40 years. The familiar worn spot on the mahogany felt cold today. The organ music swelled, and the service began. I stood when we were meant to stand. I sang the hymns, the words coming from memory, not from my heart. I bowed my head for the prayers, but I did not pray. I just listened to the frantic beating of my own heart. Then, Pastor John took to the pulpit. He was a good man, with a kind voice that usually brought me comfort. But today, every word felt like it was aimed directly at me. His sermon was on the parable of the prodigal son. He spoke of the father who watched the road every day, waiting for his lost son to return. He spoke of the unconditional love, the boundless forgiveness. The father does not ask for an apology. Pastor John boomed, his voice filling the church. He does not demand an explanation. He does not lecture the boy on his foolishness. He sees his son from a great way off, and he runs to him. He throws his arms around him and welcomes him home. My hands, in my lap, clenched into fists. My son had not run away. He had simply erased me. He had not wasted his inheritance in a far-off land. He had built a new life in the same city and had not given me the address. And I was not running to him. I had shut the door. I felt a hot flush of shame. Was I a bad Christian? Was my heart so hard that I could not find a scrap of the forgiveness Pastor John was preaching about? I sat there, in God's house, feeling utterly godless. The pastor's words about grace and mercy were a language I no longer understood. My own pain was a wall between me and my faith. The sermon ended. We sang one more hymn, and then it was over. But the ordeal was not. The congregation filed out into the bright sunshine for the informal gathering on the lawn. Coffee was poured into styrofoam cups. Cookies were passed around on paper plates. And the question started again. How is that lovely Sarah, Martha? Michael must be so excited. I cannot wait to see what kind of dress she picks out. I smiled. I deflected. I offered vague, empty phrases. Everyone is just wonderful. We are all very happy. It will be a beautiful day when it comes. Each lie was a small stone I swallowed, and they were collecting in a heavy pile in my stomach. I felt like I was suffocating in the open air, drowning in the kindness of my friends. After 10 minutes that felt like 10 years, I could not take it anymore. I found Deacon Miller and told him I had a roast in the oven and had to get home. It was a lie, but it was a good, solid, believable lie. He patted my arm and told me to have a blessed day. I walked back to my car, my steps quickening with each one. I did not look at anyone. I did not say any more goodbyes. I got into the car and shut the door, and the sound of the latch clicking into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The performance was over. The silence of the car enveloped me. I sat there, my gloved hands still on the steering wheel, and I stared at the stained glass window of the church. The sermon had been about a father who forgave. But what about the mother? What about the mother whose heart had not been broken by a foolish son, but by a calculating one? A single, hot tear escaped my eye and traced a path down my cheek. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the happy sounds of my community behind. I had survived. But as I drove back to my empty, silent house, I had never, ever felt so completely and utterly alone. The key turning in the lock of my front door sounded like a gunshot in the Sunday afternoon quiet. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, leaning against it for a long moment. The performance was over. The mask was off, and the silence of my home rushed in to claim me. It was a different silence now. It was not just empty. It was heavy, weighed down by the lies I had told in God's own house. I walked into the living room and methodically began to remove my armor. First, the white gloves, which I laid carefully on the hall table. Then the navy blue hat with its little veil, which I placed beside them. My heels sank into the soft rug as I kicked off my shoes. I felt a sudden, desperate need to get out of my Sunday dress. It felt stiff and confining, like a costume for a role I no longer knew how to play. Upstairs, I changed into a simple house dress, a soft, worn cotton that held no pretense. I washed the polite smile off my face with cool water, and when I looked in the mirror, the tired, heartbroken woman I had seen that morning was still there. Her eyes looked even sadder now. Downstairs again, I avoided my throne. I could not sit there. It felt too cold, too royal for the turmoil inside me. Instead, I found myself drawn to the other armchair, the one that had been James's. It was a big, overstuffed chair, worn in all the places his body used to rest. I sank into it, the old leather sighing under my weight. It still smelled faintly of him, of Old Spice and the pipe tobacco he used to smoke on the porch. I closed my eyes and let the grief I had been holding at bay wash over me. "Oh, James," I whispered to the empty room. "What am I supposed to do?" I could almost hear his voice, calm and steady as it had always been. He would have listened to the whole story without interrupting. He would have let me cry. He would have let me rage. And then, when I was all finished, he would have taken my hand and said something simple and true. "Martha," I could hear him say, "pride is a heavy coat to wear. It will keep you warm for a while, but it will not let anyone else get close enough to hold you." He had been the one to balance my fire. I had the pride. He had the wisdom. We were a good team, but he was not here, and all I had left was the pride, and it was a cold, lonely comfort. I thought about Pastor John's sermon, the father running to his son, the celebration. It felt like a fairy tale. Real life was messier. Real hearts did not mend so easily. Or did they? Was I the one making it messy? Was I choosing my hurt over my son? The thought was a sharp and uncomfortable one. I must have sat there for an hour, lost in a fog of memory and sorrow. And then the doorbell rang. The sound was soft, not demanding, but it jolted me back to the present with a violent shock. My first instinct was to hide, to not answer, to pretend I was not home. But I had just come from church. My car was in the driveway. The lie was too thin. Slowly, reluctantly, I got up from James's chair and walked to the door. I looked through the peephole, and my heart dropped into my stomach. It was Pastor John. He stood on my porch, holding his hat in his hands, his face etched with a gentle concern. He was not here for a social call. My hand trembled as I unlocked the door. "Pastor," I said, my voice a little rusty. "Martha," he said, his voice as kind as it was in the pulpit. "Forgive me for disturbing your afternoon. I saw you leave in a hurry. I just wanted to make sure everything was all right." He was a good man, a good shepherd checking on his flock. And I was a black sheep full of secrets. "I am fine, Pastor. Thank you for your concern," I said, keeping the screen door between us. I just had a roast in the oven. The lie came easily now. It was becoming a habit. He nodded, but he did not leave. He just looked at me with his clear, steady eyes. "It was a powerful sermon today," I offered, trying to fill the silence. "Sometimes the simplest stories are the most difficult to hear," he said softly. His words hit their mark. He knew. He did not know the details, but he knew the sermon had found a wound in me. "Martha," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "The father in that story, his love was not about being right. It was about being whole. He could not be whole without his son, no matter what that boy had done." I stared at him, my throat tight. "Sometimes," he continued, "the hardest person to forgive is the one you love the most, because the hurt they cause goes deeper than any other. But holding on to that hurt, well, it is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die." He put his hat back on his head. "I will not keep you from your roast," he said. "You are my prayers, Sister Hall." He turned and walked down the steps. I watched him go, my hand gripping the edge of the door. I had not confessed a thing. I had not told him my secret. But he had seen right through the walls I had built around my heart. He had seen the poison I was drinking. I closed the door and leaned against it, my body trembling. His words had not healed me. They had not taken away the pain. But they had done something else. They had planted a tiny, terrifying seed of doubt in the hard, barren ground of my anger. The doubt that my pride was not strength, but a prison. And I did not know if I had the strength to break free. After Pastor John left, the silence in my house returned, but it had changed its shape. It was no longer just an empty, aching void. Now, It was filled with the echo of his words. Holding on to that hurt is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. The thought was a thorn, and my mind kept circling back to it, pressing on the sharp point. I did not want to believe him. My anger felt justified. It felt like a shield. If I let it go, what would be left? Only the raw, gaping wound of the betrayal. The anger was easier to live with. It was hot and alive, while the hurt was cold and deadening. I retreated to James's chair again, seeking a comfort that was not there. I looked around the living room at the objects that had been the backdrop of my life for 40 years. The photographs on the mantelpiece, the worn family Bible on the side table, the little porcelain bird James had given me on our 10th anniversary. They were all artifacts of a life built on love, on family, on openness. What I had done to Michael, shutting the door on him, went against every single thing this room stood for. It went against everything James and I had believed in. My eyes fell on a framed photograph I had not paid much attention to in years. It was of Michael when he was about 7 years old. He was in our old backyard, holding up a small, lopsided birdhouse he had built with his father. He was missing his 2 front teeth, and his smile was a wide, joyous, gappy thing. His eyes, the same deep brown they were now, were shining with pure, uncomplicated pride. James was there beside him, one big hand resting on Michael's small shoulder, his own face beaming with a father's love. I remembered that day so clearly. The sound of their hammering, Michael's frustrated sighs when a nail would bend, James's patient, rumbling voice guiding him. And I remembered what I had done. I had come out with a pitcher of lemonade and a plate of warm chocolate chip cookies. I had told my son it was the finest birdhouse in the entire world. My job had been to nurture, to encourage, to provide the lemonade and cookies for the builders. When had I become the person who locked the door instead? The woman looking at that photograph was not the same woman who had held out that plate of cookies. The woman in this chair had chosen pride over love. James's words came back to me, clear as if he were sitting right there. Pride is a heavy coat, Martha. I was suffocating in that coat. The poison Pastor John spoke of was real. I could feel it working its way through me, making my heart hard, making my spirit bitter. I stood up from the chair, my limbs stiff. I did not know what I was going to do, but I knew I could not sit there any longer, stewing in my own toxic silence. I walked into the kitchen, a room that had always been my sanctuary. The afternoon sun streamed through the window over the sink, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The room was clean, orderly, and quiet. Too quiet. My kitchen used to be the heart of this house. It was where the best conversations happened, where problems were solved over snapping green beans, where the smell of baking bread meant love. For the past week, it had been nothing more than a place to prepare lonely meals. I ran my hand along the cool Formica countertop. My gaze fell upon my old, worn recipe box. It was a simple wooden thing, stained and nicked from years of use. Inside were generations of recipes. My mother's biscuit recipe, James's mother's recipe for sweet potato pie, and my recipe for Michael's favorite red velvet cake. He had loved that cake more than anything. I had made it for every single one of his birthdays, from his 1st to his 25th. I made it when he came home from college for the holidays. I made it just because, on a random Tuesday, to see his face light up. My fingers, almost of their own accord, flipped through the familiar, food-stained index cards until they found the one I was looking for. The card was soft with age. My own handwriting, younger and steadier, was written in blue ink. There was a faint, pinkish smudge of ancient food coloring near the corner. I stared at the recipe. Flour, sugar, buttermilk, cocoa. These were simple ingredients. But when you put them together with care, with love, they became something more. They became a celebration. They became a welcome home. I had not baked that cake in a long time. Not since before Sarah. Without making a conscious decision, I walked to the pantry. I pulled out the bag of flour. I took the sugar canister from the shelf. I reached into the refrigerator for the eggs and the buttermilk. I set the ingredients out on the counter. My hands began to move, following a rhythm they knew by heart. Sifting the flour, creaming the butter and sugar, mixing the deep red batter that James used to say was the color of my love. The kitchen began to fill with the familiar, sweet smells of my past. I was not thinking about forgiveness. I was not thinking about apologies or explanations. I was just baking a cake. It was an act, a simple, domestic motion that felt more honest than any of the lies I had told that morning. As I slid the round pans into the hot oven, I felt something shift inside me, a tiny, fragile loosening around my heart. I did not know if this cake was an answer. I did not know if I would even be able to give it to him. But as I stood in the warm, fragrant kitchen, the ghost of my younger self, the mother with the lemonade and cookies, seemed to be standing there with me. And for the first time in a week, I felt a glimmer of hope. Making something for someone you love is a kind of prayer. And I had finally started to pray. The timer on the oven buzzed, a cheerful, insistent sound that was startlingly out of place with the mood that had settled in the house. I pulled the 2 deep red cake layers from the oven, their tops perfectly domed. The sweet, rich scent of chocolate and vanilla billowed out, filling my kitchen, my house, my lungs. It was the smell of 1,000 happy memories, and for the first time, it did not bring a fresh wave of pain. I set the pans on the wire rack to cool, my movements slow and deliberate. As the cakes cooled, I made the cream cheese frosting. The electric mixer whirred to life, blending the soft cheese, the butter, the powdered sugar into a smooth, white swirl. With every turn of the beaters, a question spun in my mind. "What are you doing, Martha?" Baking a cake was one thing, an act of prayer in the privacy of my own kitchen. But what came next? The cake was a peace offering. An olive branch. But you have to deliver an olive branch. You cannot just grow it in your yard and hope the other side sees it. The thought of leaving my house, of driving to wherever it was they lived, filled me with a fresh, cold dread. What if they did not want it? What if Sarah saw it as an intrusion, a criticism of her own cooking? What if Michael saw it as me trying to buy my way back in, ignoring the real problem? My anger, which had receded, began to whisper to me again. It told me to stay home. It told me I had done enough. I had baked the cake. The next move was his. It reminded me that I was the wronged party here. I stopped the mixer and scraped down the sides of the bowl. Then I looked again at the photograph on the living room mantelpiece. The little boy with the gappy smile. That boy deserved a mother who was brave. Not a mother who hid behind her pride and her locked front door. James had not raised a coward, and I had not raised one either. Somewhere inside the man who had hurt me was the boy who had been ashamed of breaking a window and had found the courage to confess. Maybe he was just waiting for me to build a bridge. I finished the frosting and set it aside. The cakes were cool now. I carefully turned them out of their pans. One layer on the cake stand, a thick, generous layer of white frosting. Then the second layer placed perfectly on top. With my offset spatula, I covered the whole creation in a smooth, perfect blanket of white. It was a beautiful cake. Simple. Honest. It sat on my counter, a silent testament to love and memory. Now came the hardest part. My telephone sat on the wall, black and silent. It looked like a judge. I had hung up on him. The last words I had spoken to my son were cold and sharp. Now I had to pick up this phone and call him back. My hand was shaking as I lifted the receiver. My fingers felt thick and clumsy as I dialed his number, a number I knew as well as my own. It rang once, twice. I almost hung up. The old, familiar pride surged, telling me this was beneath me. Then he answered. "Hello." His voice was cautious. He did not recognize my number on a caller ID, He was just answering his phone. I took a breath. "Michael," I said. The silence on the other end was immediate and profound. I could feel his shock through the line. "Mama," he finally said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Yes, Michael. It is me," I said, my own voice softer than I intended. I could hear him breathing. I imagined him on the other end, standing in his new life, his new home, his hand gripping the phone. "Art, are you okay?" he asked. "I am fine," I said. And for the first time, it felt close to the truth. I was wondering if I could have your address." Another silence. This one was filled with confusion. "My address?" he repeated, as if he had never heard the word before. "Why?" Here it was. The moment of truth. My pride was screaming at me to make an excuse, to say I needed it for a Christmas card list or some other nonsense. But Pastor John's words about poison and James's words about pride and the image of that little boy with the birdhouse, they all held me steady. "I baked you a cake," I said, the words simple and plain. "A red velvet, and I would like to bring it over." I did not say I was sorry. I did not say we needed to talk. I did not demand anything. I just offered the cake. I heard a sound on the other end of the line, a choked, wet sound. He was crying, and this time, the sound of his tears broke right through the last of my hardened defenses and found my mother's heart. "You baked me a cake?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It is your favorite," I said softly. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear him trying to compose himself. Then he gave me the address. An apartment number on a street I did not know in a part of town I never went to. It was real. He had a new home. "I will be there in about half an hour," I told him. "Okay, Mama," he said. "We will be here." He used the word we. It was not just him. It was him and Sarah. I would be walking into their home, the home they had made together without me. I hung up the phone. My body felt strangely light, as if I had set down a heavy bag I did not even realize I had been carrying. I carefully placed the cake into my carrier. I grabbed my purse and my car keys. As I walked to the door, I paused one last time and looked at James's chair. "Wish me luck, old man," I whispered. Then I opened the front door, stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, and began the journey to the sun I was so desperate to find again. The drive to the address Michael had given me was like a journey to a foreign country. I left behind the familiar, tree-lined streets of my neighborhood, the old brick houses with their wide porches and settled histories. The car carried me toward a part of the city that was newer, sharper, full of tall, anonymous buildings made of glass and steel. With every turn, my anxiety grew. This was their world, a world I had never seen, a world I had not been invited into. The cake sat on the passenger seat, its sweet smell filling the car. It felt like the only part of me that knew how to bridge the distance. I found the apartment building. It was a modern, clean-lined structure with dozens of identical balconies. There was nothing personal about it. It was not a home, not in the way I understood the word. It was a place to live. I parked the car and sat for a long moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I could still turn back. I could leave the cake with the doorman. But I saw my son's face in my mind. Not the guilty man on the phone, but the little boy with the gappy smile. I had come this far. I had to see it through. Carrying the cake carrier like a precious, fragile treasure, I walked into the lobby and took the elevator up to the 7th floor. The hallway was silent and smelled of fresh paint. I found their door, number 7B. I stood before it, my knuckles poised to knock. This was the door my son now came home to. Behind this door was the life he had chosen, the life he had hidden. I took a deep breath, like a diver about to plunge into deep water, and I knocked. The sound was soft, but it seemed to echo in the long, quiet hall. I heard footsteps, quick and hurried. The lock turned. The door opened, and Michael stood there. He looked older than he had a week ago. His eyes were red-rimmed and shadowed with sleeplessness. He had not shaved. He looked at me, and his expression was a raw mix of terror, relief, and a desperate, pleading hope. We just stood there for a second, a mother and son separated by a doorway and a world of hurt. "Mama," he breathed. "Michael," I said. He stepped back to let me in, and I crossed the threshold. The apartment was small, but it was bright. Sunlight poured in from a large window that looked out over the city. It was neat and tidy. There were books on a shelf, a soft gray sofa, and 2 coffee mugs sitting on a small table. And on the wall, there was a framed photograph of the 2 of them, Michael and Sarah, standing on a beach, laughing. They looked so happy. Sarah was there, standing by the small kitchen counter. She was wringing her hands, her face pale and full of a fear that looked so genuine, it softened something in me. She looked like a frightened child. "Hello, Sarah," I said, my voice quiet. "Mrs. Hall," she whispered, unable to meet my eyes. "Thank you for coming." I did not know what to do, so I just held out the cake. I was not sure where to put this. Michael seemed to spring back to life. "Oh, here, Mama." On the table. He cleared away the coffee mugs and I set the cake carrier down between them. The silence that followed was thick and heavy with all the things that had not been said. I looked at my son. "You have been crying," I stated, not as an accusation but as a fact. He nodded, swallowing hard as fresh tears welled in his eyes. "I have not really stopped since we talked. Mama, I am so sorry. There is no excuse. I was a coward. I hurt you, and I will never forgive myself for that." He did not blame Sarah. He did not talk about being overwhelmed. He just owned his mistake. The little boy in the closet had become a man after all. Sarah stepped forward then, her hands still twisting. "It was my fault, too, Mrs. Hall," she said, her voice trembling. I have a lot of anxiety. My own parents had a very messy, very public divorce. The idea of a big wedding, of being the center of all that attention, it terrified me. But that is my problem, not yours. We should have told you. We should have trusted you. I am so sorry for the pain we caused. I looked at this young woman, at her honest fear and her sincere apology. I saw the way she looked at my son and the way he looked at her. And in that moment, I understood. It was not a rejection of me. It was a retreat for them. They had built a small boat for themselves to survive their own private storms, and they had not known how to let anyone else on board. The anger, the pride, the deep, ragged hurt, it did not vanish. But it shifted. It made room for something else. "You did break my heart," I said, and I let them hear the truth of my pain in those words. "Both of you. All I ever dreamed of was being there. Not for a party, not for a show, just to be there. To see my son happy, to welcome his wife into our family. You took that from me." Michael let out a soft sob. "I know, but..." I continued, and I took a deep breath. A mother's heart is a strange thing. It can be broken into 1,000 pieces and still have room to love. I looked from my son's tear-streaked face to my new daughter-in-law's frightened one. "The love your father and I had," I said, my voice growing stronger. It was not just about the big celebrations. It was about the quiet days. It was about showing up. It was about making room for each other, even when it was hard. Love has to be bigger than our fears, and it has to be stronger than our pride. I reached out and put my hand on the cake carrier. "This is a red velvet cake," I said to Sarah. "It has been Michael's favorite since he was a little boy. I would be honored if you would cut the first slice." Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide with surprise and a dawning, fragile hope. She looked at Michael, who gave her a small, watery nod. She opened the carrier, and the beautiful, simple cake sat there. A promise. She went to a drawer and got a knife and 3 plates. Her hands were shaking as she made the first cut. She served me a slice first. "Then, Michael," then herself. We sat at their small table, the three of us. The silence was still there, but it was a different kind now. It was a healing silence. I took a bite of the cake. It tasted like forgiveness. I looked at my son and his wife. Their new life was not the one I had planned for them. It would be smaller, quieter, different. But as I watched Michael reach across the table and take Sarah's hand, I saw that it was a life full of a love that was real and true. It was not my dream. It was theirs. And I, his mother, finally understood that my job was not to dream their dreams for them. My job was simply to show up with love and ask for a slice of their cake.